welcome to the Green Spot. It's really good to have you here with us. I won't say that I'm a wealth of knowledge. What I usually tell people when they ask me questions, I say, I just own the place. It doesn't mean I know everything that's going on here, but hopefully I can answer any questions. So in front of you there, and sorry about the dark line that went down there, I realized that the photocopy had something going on in it, but so there's a sheet there that gives you a little bit of an agenda of what we'll cover tonight. It looks like a lot of stuff, but we'll ramble our way through it. And but please, anytime you got a question, just shout out. It's not a formal presentation. So just to introduce first myself, I've been here at the Green Spot for 10 years, just completed my 10th year last November. Previous to that, I was in the seed business here in Brandon. We sold seed to the farm community, and I did that for about 25 years, so this is kind of a second career for me. And then before that, I was with, none of you will probably remember Manitoba Pool Elevators. It's now, I think, Viterra now. And I was in Winnipeg with that, and I was there for 3 years. Before that, I took my degree in agriculture at University of Manitoba. So home for me is Deloraine country. So coming to Brandon was just about home, so it was good. And then after I sold after we sold, my partners and I sold the seed business, I still hadn't quite got all the academia out of my system, so I went back to university and did a master's in business administration. I just kind of needed to do it. I probably hadn't worked that hard in my life. It was a 2-year course that I did in 1 year, so every hour of every day of 11 months was planned. I think I took a couple hours off Saturday night and a couple Sunday, and so that's how I got my MBA. But anyway, I'm totally glad I did. And if any of you ever want to go back to school, an MBA is wonderful. It's a lot of work, but it's certainly worthwhile. Coming out of that, I can't say that I am any better in business, but I had a whole ton more confidence about coming into business. So the beauty of that was I had kind of a year to decide whether I wanted to come here or not. So after I left the seed business, I got a spring job. So I was making $90,000 at the seed business, and I got a job here for $9 an hour selling trees. So it was a little bit of a reality check, but I loved it, and then decided that this was what I wanted to do. I didn't know that it was for sale when I came here, but Dick, the owner, said, well, hey, why don't you buy this place instead of going back to school? And I said, well, kind of want to go to school. And so while I was there, I kind of made my mind up that I wanted to come back here. So it was a good decision. So I love coming to work every day. So the Green Spot, you can just have that little brochure there. That kind of tells you what we're all about. This year is our 40th year in business. So the Vreeman family built it from the ground up, from scratch. And I'm very grateful to them. Some of you may know Dick Vreeman, so he's a little bit younger than me. And he kind of worked along with his mother and dad. His dad's not living now, he died last fall, but good people, and they built a really solid business here, so I was able to assume a very solid business. So it's been fun since I took over. We've done a few things a little differently. We've added a lot more in the giftware. You walk through the women's fashion area, that's been a big growth area for us. And a good area, about 75% of our clientele is female. So one of the things we need to do is to keep our staff and our business running 12 months of the year, not just spring and at Christmas. So this has enabled us to do that a little easier. We still have slow times, Jan, Feb are really slow, and that's everybody's paying their visa bill off from Christmas. and August, September, October are slow, and that's when people are kind of coming back from summer holidays and getting kids back to school, and so that's a bit of a slow period too. But anyway, so that's the green spot. We added, along with the fashion, my nephew had been running a landscape business, so he wanted to kind of get out of the administrative side and just do the operating. So then we rolled his company into my company, and so now we have Wetter Landscapes it's a separate company, but we run it under Green Spot. So that adds a nice component onto the business also. So they're busy 1st of April to end of November. So it kind of fills that out. So, any questions about the Green Spot? Okay. Sorry, we aren't going to be able to do anything on overhead. Not that I had much planned, but as is typical with these things, there's always technical difficulties. So we just... Well, I just told you about it today, so you're off the hook. So anyway, hopefully we've got enough stuff around the room that we can kind of talk about as we go along. A lot of the conversation, I have a feeling it's going to be elementary for you. Just looking around the room, I'm quite sure that you're very familiar with gardening. So I'm going to touch on those elementary points. I know you'll know about it, and you can just say, hey, move on. You know, we know all that stuff. So don't. You're not going to offend me by telling me to move along. My partner Sophie here, she'll help wherever she can. Hopefully not by eating the cupcakes, but. So if you turn to your sheet with the long black stripe down the left-hand side, that's what we're going to follow along. So just kind of wanted to start with some of the basics, and the first page is kind of where you're going to know all of this stuff. But, so if we talk about plant basics, first thing is that all plants are categorized into sun or shade. And how we define full sun is 6 hours. So if a plant is getting 6 hours or is full sun, it means it needs to be in the full sun for about 6 hours. And that's probably after about 10 o'clock. So the morning 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. sun doesn't really count as much as the 10 a.m. That's when it gets strong. And when we talk about full shade, it means full shade. So no sun at all, so the north side of the building or in the shade of a tree. And then there's everything in between. So I looked up some fancy words here. I knew the word xerophyte, and xerophyte means a plant that needs very, very little moisture. So what's an example of a xerophyte? There you go, cactus, yeah. So the opposite of that was a water-loving plant, and I thought there's got to be a technical term for a water-loving plant, so I googled water-loving plant, and it kept coming up, water-loving plant, until finally I found a website that calls them the hydrophyte. So a hydrophyte, hydro means water, so a hydrophyte is a plant that, on the other extreme, lives in the water. So pond plants, plants that live in sloughs, you know, like the cattail and that, those are all hydrophytes. And then all the ones in between, and that's mostly the ones that we're familiar with, are called mesophytes. So they like moisture, but they don't live solely in the moisture, and they don't like to have too dry conditions. Now, are you all familiar with the hardiness scale? Okay, do you know what we are here? What do you think? 3, you're right. Yeah, so as I looked up on the internet, every country in the world has a hardiness scale, and that's again a classification where plants will fit, they'll live comfortably in that zone. So Canada has its own scale. It's very close to the one that has been developed in the U.S., but they take a look at the average low temperature, the average high temperature, the average low moisture content, the average high content. They look at frost-free days. They look at amount of wind. There's a whole factor and a very long formula, and then they come up with this number. So we happen to be in 3B, I think is our category right here. 3A is closer to Morden country. There's kind of an area around that Morden. They call it the is it the Pembina?
Sunbelt.
Yeah, that's right. There's a sun belt right around Morden, and that's a 3A. And then it gets, so the higher the number, the more warmer it is, and so they can grow a greater variety of plants. So we can grow anything that's a zone 2 or a zone 3. We can get away with some zone 4 here, but it has to be planted in a very protected area. So you want it in a corner of your lot that's got well protected from the wind, gets a good amount of snowfall dropping on top of it, and it's not prone to a lot of the winter winds and that sort of thing. So we can get away with some zone 4. So that's the other thing that you have to always be watching for with perennials and trees and shrubs. You always got to look at the zone. So go for zone 3. You know that you're really safe with zone 2, and if you're courageous, you can try zone 4, but be prepared for it not to make it. So that's one of the risks to take with zone 4. Okay, so that's kind of the basic for us where the plants fit. So it's sun versus shade, moisture loving versus dry conditions, and then the zone, which takes into account all of those other things. Any questions around any of that? Okay. Now, the next part, you're all going to know this too. We've got what we sell here, basically 4 kinds of plants: annuals, perennials, trees, and shrubs. And I could add tropicals onto that too, but we can talk about that at the end. So you all know what an annual is. It's those things that just grow for 1 year, and then they die, right? They die at the end of the year. Now, interestingly enough, given an opportunity, a lot of our annuals will continue to grow. Geranium is an example. So this geranium, I don't know how many years old this one might be. A woman phoned me up, and she's an elderly lady, and she says, you know, I don't feel like keeping this thing anymore. She kept it around because she would slip it and start her new plants every year. So she kept the mother plant. So I brought them here last fall, and it's been quite happy. It's bloomed again. So it's quite happy to grow perennially, but we call it an annual. You know what this is?
Grass.
No. We have another word for it.
Like a spike plant.
Yes, spike. So we call it Dracaena here, is the common name for it. So the Dracaena also, we treat it like an annual because we plant it in our planters and we leave them outside, they freeze, and we chuck it, right? This one will grow. In fact, when I first came here, this plant was about 8 feet tall, and a stalk on it about that big around, and the pot was just a couple inches bigger than that around the edges. But given a chance, it'll carry on, and because it is called a spike, those things, when the leaves get brittle, and it'll poke your eye out if you're not careful. So we were kind of anxious about it here in the greenhouse because it'll go up and poke holes in the plastic. And so I go to Knox Church. Well, Knox has got a pretty high ceiling in it, so I took this thing over there, and it still lived there for 2 or 3 years, and then finally, people don't look after plants very well in churches usually, so it bit the dust there. But excuse me, given a chance, they will live longer than one season. But anyway, typically annuals, we think of annuals as flowers, so marigolds, petunias, those ones we know they don't last much longer, and really after they're done flowering, they're not very pretty anyway, so even if they could you know, live when you brought them in your house. They're kind of ugly after they flower. So also we got the fruit and vegetables. Just an interesting little discussion now. Is a tomato a fruit or a vegetable? You said fruit? Yeah. Because it comes from the ovary in the flower. And I don't want to get too botanical here, but the ovary is just the part at the bottom of the flower, and from that this fruit body starts to grow. So anything that contains the seeds inside it, like so peas, beans, pumpkins, cantaloupe, tomatoes, what else can you think of that might be called a fruit? Squash. Those things are all called fruit, even though we think of fruit being something sweet, but actually it can be those others. But we still call them vegetables, but technically they're fruit because of the way they're produced. And the vegetables mainly are those things that we harvest: the stems, the leaves, and the roots. So carrots, cabbage, stems, I mean we eat beet stems, but we also eat the roots. So those are clearly vegetables. And they're clearly annuals. A carrot is actually a biennial, so if any of you left your carrots in the garden, forgot to dig them up in the fall, they just might come back in the spring. They are classified as a biennial, so biennial means it's vegetative the first year, and then the second year after winter, it will actually produce seed. But typically we don't give them the chance to do that either, and even if you did leave them in a garden, probably they get windswept and froze right to the ground, and so they're gonna be mush in the spring. So then the other annual is are ones that we just grow for vegetative purposes, and so that's more for our ornamentals. So it is like the Dracaena, even though we said it will grow. This one's called cordyline, and the same thing with this one. Cordyline will, if you were in Florida, this would be a tropical plant and would grow in your home, but here we just treat it like an annual. And then of course you mentioned grasses in the early end, but we have all these new grasses now. We can hand these things around, you can read the labels. And here's the geranium that's just coming along, and again, we treat it like an annual, but if you give it the chance, it might grow longer. So
These grasses will come back though, won't they?
so we have grasses in the annuals, and we have grasses in the perennial house. These ones probably would not. So the grasses, if you're looking through a garden center, it should state very clearly on the label that it's an annual or a perennial. Now, does that one say annual? Does it say annual on there anywhere? On the tag? No. It would be on the front there if it did. It may not, but on the perennial one it should say perennial. It may not say that on the annual. So a perennial would be like a Carl Forester, and that's the ones that grow about this tall. You see them a lot. People are using grasses in their landscapes a lot more frequently now than they used to. And they're quite attractive, particularly planted in groups. So, but these ones, so just to tell you a little bit about our place here, anything that's in this building that you've walked through, that's all going to be annual. Only annuals in here. And then once we open up the perennial house, which is across the way there, only perennials are over there. So you know that if you're buying anything up front here, it's going to be an annual. You're only going to get one season out of it. Over there, hopefully you'll get multiple seasons. So that's kind of how that works.
So Bernie,
yes.
annuals, is it just that our weather will let them grow more than one season, or are there
Right.
some plants that will only grow, like a carrot, well, no, not a carrot, like some plants will only do one
Yeah,
season?
so if an annual would be if you planted it and you left it outside, it's going to be dead come next spring. This would be dead outside next spring. So we call it an annual. But if you brought a lot of these things inside, like this and like this and like the Dracaena, you're probably it's gonna grow more and more, like over several years. Yeah.
What about a petunia? If you brought that into the...
Yeah, I don't ever hear people bringing petunias in. I'm sure you could keep it growing. It would be vegetative, it would just grow, and it would probably get scraggly and ugly, and you'd be throwing it out by January. I mean, unless you had a hothouse or something to keep it. Yeah.
Because it wouldn't bloom again.
Not during the winter, because all the blooms are photosensitive, so they need a certain amount of light in order to trigger budding and blooming.
So what would make something like a petunia go to seed?
Pardon me?
What would cause like a petunia to go to seed?
So that's happened to you?
Yeah.
Um,
Under my deck, actually.
it went on your deck.
Like underneath.
Yeah, so did you start it really early?
No, I don't know. I always have petunias all over my deck planted, and so I went under there to go get my hose that was shoved under my deck, and I had a secret garden of petunias growing.
Yeah.
Covered over winter.
Yeah, so I mean, a plant wants to produce seed. That's its sole purpose in life, right? Is to produce seed. So it's going to do everything in its nature that it can do, provided weather cooperates, to produce seed. So are you saying they produce seed every year, or just it happened?
It just kind of happened.
Yeah. Now, the other thing that we can talk about in maintenance of annuals, you all heard about deadheading? Yeah. It's a job that we all hate, but it looks nice. This is basically deadheading on a geranium. So you pull all these off, right? If left, now I don't know if this one would produce seed, but seed's going to come out of here, out of the flower somewhere, right? So if you're not deadheading your petunia, then chances are it's going to go to seed, provided that conditions were right.
So then you could take those seeds when they come and start. Say
You could, for sure you could do that, except if it's a hybrid. And this is where I don't want to get, because I'll dig myself in a hole and then I can't get out. But a hybrid is a cross between a male flower and a female. A male, yes, one donates the pollen and the other one has the ovaries in it, okay? So then that becomes a hybrid, and it won't produce, it'll produce seed, but the progeny won't look like the parent. It'll look like this one and that one and everything in between. So yeah, so your plants could be, and some of them may say a hybrid or an H1 cross or something like that, then you know it's a hybrid. Sophie? And she's got her nose up there. And then you know you're not going to get a true replication. Does that answer your question? So yeah, it's possible that these plants are going to set seed. Yeah, but most people would deadhead their petunias, or I shouldn't say most people. A lot of people deadhead their petunias, so it never gets the chance to set seed. And they're producing varieties now that don't need deadheadings, and I think it's just that they minimize somehow that the dead flower drops off, or it doesn't hang on there, so then it doesn't look unsightly. So, okay, any other questions about annuals? You can take one of these home. There's your first plant of the spring. Just don't freeze it on the way home. Now I just wanted to talk briefly about kind of what we do here. So we either seed our and it's mostly I'm talking vegetables that we seed. We seed all our tomatoes, so we start them from seed. We seed the onions, like you're going to see here. We seed some of the flowers, but most of it we use plugs, okay? And the reason why is because if we were to seed, there are there are 52 plants in here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, what would that be? 13? Yeah. We probably wouldn't get 100% germination. So if I'm not getting 100% germination in here, I've wasted money on staff and heat and water and fertilizer and all of those things, and then I didn't get anything out of it. So then the industry moved to purchasing plugs. So there's garden centers across most of the ones we get are in Alberta, and there's a whole bunch down in the Niagara Peninsula. So they do this for us. And then when I buy the tray, I'm getting 52 in the tray. I'm not getting 85% or 75%. So when I get this little plug, really that's all I'm getting is a plug. Okay, just about the size of a cork in a wine bottle. And they're in various sizes. That's typical what we have for our annuals. We have even smaller ones that are just about the size of your tip of your little finger. But that's called a plug. So that's the majority of all of our flowers, and the majority of our perennials are planted with plugs. Okay?
And then you transplant them?
Yeah, so we'll take that little plug and we'll put it in a pot this size. And we just have a little stick that's about the size of your pencil. It's called a dibbler. And we just shove it in, make a little hole, and shove the plug in to a little pot, water it, and stick it in the greenhouse. But it's all manual. So
You have a wine cork that you use, right?
to make the hole?
Make the hole.
Yeah, we call it a dibbler.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a very, very scientific name. Yeah. So for those things that we seed, and basically it's tomatoes. So our seeder just plants it in a row, really, really thick, like that. And then when it's time for us to plant them, they just dig this out like this, and they split that out, and they pull this little tomato seedling out like that. And again, they take their dibbler and they make a hole and they stick it in there and they tap it back in, the soil around it, and our tomatoes take off. So.
How do you choose which plants you get as plugs and which ones to seed?
Well, we just, I'll pretend that I never pulled those out. Because I don't know what I'm doing here, so did you, oh, sorry, yeah. Okay, good, I'll take that, great. We just know from years of experience that we will only ever seed tomatoes and onions, and we will only ever do plugs in other varieties. I mean, we just know that. It's word of mouth that's transferred down over the years from one grower to
better
the other.
margins with this than you
Yes.
Yeah, better return.
Yeah.
chasing.
Yeah, and the other thing is, so we're bringing these in now, so it's the 1st of March, so I haven't had to heat the greenhouses December, January, February. And these grow fast, so we probably seeded these in middle of February. So they're up now they're ready. But we can do thousands of plants in this one tray,
Yeah.
right?
I buy seeds for the petunias, for the wave petunias.
Yeah,
And so it's like $6 for a pack of seeds, and you get like 5 or 6 seeds. And out of that, usually I get 2 plants that I've never gotten before. So really, it's just
yeah. So
you'll
we'll,
see the love of the growth.
yeah, there you go. It's the joy of doing that, right? And then with onions, we seed them thick, but this is what you buy. So we've seeded it, and then you'll come along in the spring and you'll rip this pack out of here, and then you're going to buy that pack for $2 and something. But you got probably 20 or 30 plants in there. So
So are there any vegetables like this that you could grow inside in your kitchen, or they should all be outside?
these would typically need to be outside, but you could certainly start them inside. Things like herbs, you can grow them inside year round, but they're happier outside. So once all danger frost is going, you're going to want to put all your, including your tropical house plants.
Yeah.
You want to put them all outside. They're so much happier out there than. Okay, that's our annual story. Questions on annuals? All right. Perennials. So, what are some? Do you want a chair? It's here. Okay, sure. Perennial flowers are, what are some perennial flowers? Okay, now that's an interesting one because we don't buy hosta particularly for the flower, right?
No.
It's more for the vegetative?
Green.
Yeah, so I have it in the next category called vegetative. But which one would you buy for a flower? Which perennial would you buy for a flower?
Oh, black-eyed Susan.
There you go. Yeah, it's a perennial. Peony, iris, echinacea. Echinacea is a huge seller for us now because they come in reds and yellows and purple. They're beautiful. Lilies, daylilies are a big one. So those tulip. Yes. Now that's sort of a different category, and a good thing you brought that one up. Tulip is a, I don't know if we're going to call that a perennial. It's a bulb that can stay in the ground. So I guess we could call that a perennial because it's going to come up every year. So
Gladiola.
glads are the same as the tulip, aren't they? So, but you pull the glad corms up. So I wouldn't call them a perennial. That's a bulb, which is kind of a category, particularly that one, like gladiolas and dahlias. You pull them up every year, you bring them inside, store them in a cool, dark place, and you plant them again in the spring, right? Is that what you do with yours?
I just take them up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, irises are something you can leave year round.
Iris will
But
stay.
they should be dug up every now and then and broken up
That's right.
because they get plump.
They get big, clumpy, and then they die in the middle, and they just don't look pretty after a while. So, yeah, for sure.
Question about ferns.
Yes.
So we have them in flower beds in front of our house.
Yeah.
And I just want to tear them out.
Right, because they're spreading like crazy.
They're just getting taller. They're getting
Yeah.
ridiculous. So, I think that they're fairly big. I don't have a reference.
Yeah, the ferns that you're talking about are the ones that'll grow about this tall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I try to pull them out. It's impossible.
It is.
Right. So.
Because they spread by rhizome,
Okay.
so they're kind of their own roots that keep creeping out, and then they send up another one, and then those ones send out more, and then soon
Okay.
you got a full.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so you gotta go at it. If you want to get rid of them, you gotta go at it hard.
And how do I do that? What are the steps?
Basically, you have to dig it up. You have to dig it all
You need one of
over.
these.
That's the only, I've seen some of a yard, and it took me the better part of the summer to chase every time they would come back.
Yeah,
So just
Because-
monitor it.
Because
Yeah.
as Bernie said, if you leave a segment of root that long, it'll send out creepers.
Yeah.
And like you said,
Right.
they'll pop up out from under a rock.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So barbecue at my place once a month.
There you go. Make it a family and friends day. Yeah,
Okay.
But I
so-
did in that instance was screen the dirt. I dug it and screened.
Oh,
the
sure,
dirt.
yeah.
And that was the only way I was able to finally get rid of them.
right.
And then I just want to put rocks, decorative rocks
Yeah.
on top
Yeah.
instead. And then
So we'll come to that also, and you can bring that up if I don't cover it later. But yeah, so getting rid of perennials is also another issue. That's a whole different game. But as I say, it involves a shovel and diligence. So some of the ones you want to keep, you can't keep, and the ones you want to get rid of, yeah. There you go. Yeah. Now there are some perennials that are fruits. So what would those be?
Strawberries.
Strawberries.
Honey grapes.
What did you say?
Grapes.
Okay, so now what I needed to explain is a perennial, a herbaceous perennial it's got leaves and greens on top, and then the top dies, the root stays alive. That's what I call a perennial. So the top dies, there you go, rhubarb. Yeah, okay, because on a grape, your stalk is above the ground and it stays alive, right, like a tree. Same with blueberries, same with raspberries, so we were coming to those. But a rhubarb is gonna die down. Is there one more? There's one more that grows, and I think it might be more in the vegetable category.
Sunflower.
Asparagus, yeah. What'd you say?
Sunflower.
Sunflower is an annual. Yeah, that won't come back. There's a, now here we go, heliotrope. What's the other word for, there is a type of sunflower that is a perennial, but it's a very small, it's a perennial, but that's just for a flower, yeah, so. Okay, and then there are the perennials that are just strictly what I call vegetative, and that's where I would have called hosta. So we grow hosta because we just like the look of the leaf on it. Are you all familiar with hostas? They're really one of my favorite perennials. And they have just tons of varieties. They come out with a hosta of the year every year. And a lot of the avid gardeners will buy that hosta every year, and they've got an entire area of their yard dedicated to hostas. And they're really quite beautiful. Yeah. And they got yellows, greens, whites, and everything in between, all the different patterns, and they're quite beautiful. I don't know if any of you have ever done the garden tour, but Greg Boguski lives out on a G, is it in a G, the G Bay or H? Moose? There you go. I call it the zoo. But I just remember his hostas, and he had them growing under the deck, but the leaves on that thing were about like that. They were just huge. And he attributed that to, he and Joe are excellent gardeners, but I think he just dumped a ton of manure in there, and they were as happy as could be. So, okay, so now we're moving into shrubs. Okay, so shrubs are that bushy plant. They don't grow much more than about 6 feet tall or a little higher, and the stems are up there and they stay alive, right, all year. But the leaves fall off, and when the leaves fall off, we call it. Yeah, but there's a word we call that type of plant when a tree or a shrub when the leaves drop in the fall. It's called deciduous. Okay, so deciduous is when the leaves drop, as opposed to evergreen when the leaves stay on, or the needles. All right. So that's another word you can write there, deciduous. So what are a couple of examples of deciduous
Lilac.
shrubs? Lilac, that's the one we all think of.
Caraganas.
Yeah, caragana is a big one. It doesn't I don't put it in a tree. And I didn't even write it down because I don't like caragana. so don't write that one down. You don't ever want to use caragana. But you know what? In the dirty 30s, caraganas were some of the only things that grew, and that's what saved a lot of farms, was these poor caraganas. Yeah. And they spread like crazy because they grow, and then they get big, and those branches fall down, and then they drop their seeds, and then they're just, but anyway, there's some really nice ornamental caraganas. Now you can get the ones, the weeping caragana that are on a stalk. They graft this, it's grafted, and then they weep down. They're quite attractive. And there's a pygmy caragana, and there's the three-lobe caragana. So there's some nice forms of caragana, but don't get the other ones, okay? You got to promise me you won't do that. The other ones are like spirea. So they're deciduous, and we really just buy them for the color, right? Because spirea can be lime green, they can be yellow, they can be red, and all those colors.
I have a chain link fence that is
A which?
There's a chain link fence.
Yeah, yeah,
Covered in vines.
right.
What is the typical vine that you
It's probably Virginia creeper. So we got 2 vines. There's Virginia creeper and there's Engelmann ivy. And Virginia creeper is the most common.
bright red in the fall?
Yeah, it goes bright red. So it's quite attractive, but it will take over. So you gotta prune that sucker back. And give it a good, don't be afraid to clip it back. Good, because it'll just keep coming. But if you got an area that you want to hide, like the neighbor's view or the neighbor's, or your own garbage container or your partner's old relic car or something, you know, and you can put, so you can put a fence up and it'll be covered in 3-4 years, because you'll get a foot of growth a year easy. Yeah.
Bernie, I have something that totally once was wild cucumber.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They're like little, it's mine.
Yeah.
And they're little.
Get these puffballs on them.
Puffballs and they're spiky. And
Yeah. I don't know much about them, but I know what you're talking about.
So they are wild cucumbers.
I think so.
That's what they're called.
And the other thing that looks like that are hops. So if you want to get into your own beer making, you can buy hops, and you can purchase hops. We often have them here. So, and they look very similar to that, but I don't think they're the same thing. But yeah, I'm sorry, I can't tell you the exact. If you had been on here, you could look that up. This is an excellent resource, folks. So if you got your internet and you got a question, all the answers are in here. Okay, I have yet to be stumped by that one, but. And then there's the evergreen shrubs. So we got cedars, junipers, and there's no end of varieties. You can have ones that grow that low to the ground, and you can have ones that are this big. You can have, there's no end of the evergreen shrubs. And then of course there's the fruit. So you mentioned blueberry, raspberry, Saskatoon, cranberry. Cranberry is an interesting one because the other word for it is nannyberry, and it's used vegetatively because it's quite beautiful. It goes a bright crimson red in the fall also, so it's a nice one to have. And then we get into trees. So again, we got the same category in trees as we do for shrubs. There's deciduous. So you all know about the leaves that you have to rake up in the fall. What are those trees? What varieties of trees drop their leaves?
Maples, oaks,
Poplar, ash,
cottonwoods.
elm, yeah, linden, all of those ones that you curse in the fall, either because you have so many leaves to rake up, or you curse the neighbor because all their leaves are in your yard. So the trick is just to rake on windy days. And don't tell anybody else I said that.
You're wonderful. It's our bedtime.
Okay, nice to have you. All right, bye-bye. Oh, I got something for you. It was going to be a secret for everybody else, but now I guess they're
ruined
good.
everything.
You did. Now the secret has been exposed.
Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome. Okay.
Nice, Dad.
Did you get your Dracaena? Did you get your plant?
Yeah.
Yeah, take. There. You look after that. It'll grow nice and big for you. Okay, we're getting close. And then there's the evergreens. There's cedar, spruce, pine. You know all that. Tamarack is an interesting one. Tamarack has got evergreen needles. It's a coniferous, but it drops its needles in the fall. So if you're going up to Clear Lake and you see this bright, brilliant yellow in the fall, it's probably a tamarack. So it's a coniferous. It produces pine cones, but it drops its needles. So it's a little different. We've got the ornamental trees, so I like to put the amber maple in that category. Flowering crab, we only grow them for ornamental purposes. And then of course there's a fruit, apple, pear, plum, cherry, which we can grow all of those. Okay, any questions about plants in general? Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about tools. Are you all tooled up at home? You've got a shed full of tools? Okay, well, I won't spend long. These are the ones that I think are are essential for every gardener. So you need a spade. This isn't. This is the round mouth. So this is the one that you were going to use to. No, she was going to use to dig out her ferns. A round mouth is a really nice tool. It's great for digging. It goes in easy, and it's just something you got to have. Okay. Then there's the square mouth. This isn't a true square mouth. The square is probably cut down the side here, but this is the only one I could find at the moment. So square is nice for kind of finishing off holes. So if you're wanting to dig down and have a straight side, or when you're planting a tree, you want to have the bottom flattened out. So it's nice to have a square mouth spade. Okay. You probably need two kinds of rakes. This one is for leveling out. It's for taking the rocks and roots and different things off of your ground, and if you're going to prepare a seed bed for either your garden or a lawn, you need a rake like this. And landscapers will have this rake, but it's about this wide.
3 feet.
Yeah.
And shorter fingered.
Yes, that's right.
A lot of the time they're shorter fingered so that they can use it to push dirt back.
Yeah.
Push it forward and help it
Yeah.
helps someone.
Both ways, and sometimes you'll see them flip it over and.
Usually those rakes have a blade that's flat with no teeth on the opposite side of the tooth
So
side.
they can do it for leveling. Okay. And this one, of course, was to do that nasty job raking leaves. Sorry, I don't have this one screwed on, but these are relatively inexpensive, and you can get bigger ones. And the bigger ones are nicer because then you can cover more ground with one. But it's a leaf rake, so it's a pretty handy thing to have if you've got deciduous trees around. All right.
Crab rakes also work good if you're broadcasting. If you're going to top seed with anything like grass seeds, it works well after you broadcast. Just drag it gently over. It helps ruffle a bit of the topsoil and gives the seed a little bit of bedding in it.
Yeah, a little bit of cover. Yeah, for sure.
It works well.
Yeah. Now there's no end of the kind of hose that you can purchase. This one's called a D hoe. I think this one also might be called a Dutch hoe. And it will work both ways. So it basically just cuts the root off of your weeds when you're operating it like that. So I haven't found this one to be real useful, but I don't do a lot of hoeing. So, but there's lots of people that want a D-hoe. Okay. This one I find a little bit more useful because it you can hook. If you're weeding and you're weeding, say between a row, you can hook the weeds out with these corners or get them with that edge. So it's a nice hole. And then I didn't have all of them, but there's another one that's it's kind of got a wider blade, and then you can use it for trenching. So if you're planting your garden and you need to make a trench, you could use this one too, but it's not a very wide wing on it. But then you just pull it backwards and make your trench with that.
What do you call this one?
Shaped like a cultivator shovel.
Just make something up.
Yeah. You know what? If you come back to the green spot in maybe next month or for sure in May, I've got a beautiful line of garden tools coming. We bought them out of England. Unfortunately, they're bought out of England, made in China. There you go, right? But I think they're going to end up being a little pricier than what I'd like to see. But they're really beautiful set of tools. And there's about 3 or 4 kinds of holes in there. But I'm sorry, I can't tell you what the name of this one is. But it might be. But I'll come back to you on that one.
Bernie, do you recommend sharpening the hose?
Yes.
Here?
absolutely right. And it's on my notes here. So let me come to that when I get through all this, all right? Now, this one is, I think it's a must-have if you're going to get into your landscaping. And this is just simply called an edger. This one, I haven't used one like this. It's a little hardier, but it's big enough for you to get your toe in there. And so you can make your edges around. It makes a nice clean edge. And then you can do your curvy lines, straight lines, whatever it is you need to do. So an edger to me is a must-have if you're going to get into some more designing in your yard. Okay, edger. And they come. That's a fairly rugged-looking one. How many of you pry your jars open with the tip of a knife? Some of you do that? Don't do that. And don't do those sorts of things with these tools either. So this is meant to make the edge. You can do a little pry, but there are so many of these tools, and this one's well built, but they look like this by the time you're done with them because you've used them to pry, lifting rocks, lifting hunks of concrete. These are just meant to cut sod and lift a little bit, okay? So they do have a life expectancy. Now there's a couple of other tools. I live out here and I got dandelions, but my yard's so big that I don't worry about digging out dandelions. But there's lots of tools out there to dig dandelions. This one is sort of interesting. This lever here is to put your foot on so you can press down to dig it. So what you need to do at the dandelion, have you ever pulled one up? It's got a long taproot on it. So the idea is to shove this down around the crown of the dandelion and then to get this around the root. And then when you pull back, you're prying on that thing again and it clamps around the taproot, and then you can just pry the whole thing up. This one you can pry with. But only for dandelions. But even then, I think it's almost too short because most taproots on dandelions that are big, they're down here, and it will come back just like the ferns. This is another one, and again, you can already see that probably somebody pried with that in the shop here, but you can go down and get down around the taproot with this one. I don't think this one's very useful, but there's a lot of them. You know what I find for all of you, you're all in a city lot, right? No, are you in the country? Well, for city lot people, you don't have a ton of space to have to deal with. One thing that works quite good is a screwdriver. And on your hands and knees, and just go down and punch this in beside and just roll it around like that a few times, and you'll just be able to lift that dandelion out and put the darn thing in a bucket and throw it away. Yeah, because it has the uncanny ability, even though you've pulled it out, it has the ability even then to still produce seeds.
Yeah, they'll put everything that they've got in the plant to going to seed. So it will actually turn everything that it's got for nutrients left to putting under seed that one last time. And it's a survival.
It sure is. Yeah.
You'll find a pail of them if you pulled them and you left them dry out in the sun. You went back a month later, it would be full of white seed.
Yeah. Just waiting to find a home.
Just
Yeah.
food for vegetation, cheaply.
Well, I know, and I'm sure you could make wine out of the leaves and.
Well, dandelion root, believe it or not, if it's dried and ground, you can make flour out of it. And I dare anybody to make a cake with it and tell me that it's not chocolate. Because it will taste and look exactly like chocolate.
Okay.
You know, dandelion root, if dried and ground to a flour base, will produce a cake that tastes like chocolate.
Wow. There you go. What do you call it? What do you call it?
I have a friend of mine that thinks the dandelion is the most versatile plant on the planet.
Yeah.
Because he says every single part of it can be eaten.
Yeah,
It's one of the very
yeah.
few plants that
It's just, it's such a, I don't want to call it an invasive species, but I mean, you only have to look at our parks.
yeah.
And there's just one right across the road here, and it's just a sea of yellow. I mean, it's pretty for a few days, and then these things will go to seed, and you know that they're just seeding. And when we're in a park where the grass is mowed, we're removing a lot of the competition, so they just thrive. So.
And you'll find dandelions in the park eventually take over the green space to the
Yeah.
point where there's nothing but dirt and dandelions.
Yeah, and then when the dandelion is dead, then what's left is
Bald
dirt.
spots.
Yeah, so. Hand tools, again, you're on your hands and knees and you're working with these things. This is just a spade for, you know, putting your bulbs in. It's got generally they got little measurements in it so that it tells you how deep you're digging. So if they say plant this bulb at 2 inches, well, you dig down 2 inches and you lift it up and you stick your bulb in. So just a little hand rake and again a weeding tool. So, but they're good to have around. I don't do a lot of gardening myself because I'm here all the time, but I know that hand tools are kind of something that everybody has in their back pocket when they head into the garden. So. And we will get talking about pruning in a bit, but you probably do need 2 sizes of pruners. You need the little hand guys, and these are for cutting twigs off, you know, the size of your fingers and smaller, okay? And then when you get to the size of your thumb and bigger, then you need bigger pruners, all right? Don't try to do the bigger ones with this. I've done it, and it can be done with a bit of work, but you end up wrecking your pruners. And the typical thing that we do with these ones is we get it cut, and we're having a heck of a time getting through. So then we start doing this, and then the next thing we know, we've spread the knife here apart, and it's garbage. So just cut straight and don't be twisting. And those of you that like to open jars with the tip of a knife, same thing. Don't do it with this. Okay. Yes. Some other kinds of tools. There's ones with extensible handles. So I didn't bring one here, but they're generally a metal handle. I'm sorry, I didn't bring one. And they've just got a handle here. You can shove it down to be this long. If you're, say, working in a raised bed garden, you don't need a big long handle. You just need this, or if you need the whole thing. The other thing that works good for is if you're a wheelchair gardener, or any other reason you want a short handle and a long handle, or if you need to reach up to get something, you know, there's really long extendable handles. So extendable handles were nice, and also they've come a great distance now with ergonomic handles. So they've studied how our wrists and muscles work, and so they've used these are not ergonomic handles. They've got nice pads on them, but the ergonomic ones you're pushing more with the palm of your hand. So that's where the strength is, opposed to this way. So you'll see them with a bent handle, so that you're pushing more than trying to slide it. So. And to your point, yes, tools should be always kept sharp, and you need to clean them. So after every use, particularly if you're working in mud or wet soil, scrape the mud off and be sure that they're stored in a dry spot, because the next thing you'll know, they'll rust they'll rust very quickly, and then once they've started to rust, then they lose their ability to slide through the soil. So you can curb that by scraping off the soil, take a wire brush to it, and then oil it. So there's a bit of work to it, but every spring, if you like, you can bring all your tools down here, and I will personally sharpen them all for free. So it's something we do here. It's the 28th of April. Is that a Saturday? So it's tool sharpening day. So bring your tools down and I'll sharpen them. I have sharpened these ones too. I don't really like doing it, but I can get a file in here and take a little bit of edge off. But man, some of the tools that come in are in such horrible shape. And like you can generally, look through here because they've pried these apart, and really I should just take them and throw them in the garbage and try to sell them a new set, but that's not my job. So
What kind of oil to do with these?
just regular oil, even dirty oil that you've taken if you change your own oil in your car or your yeah. Just
What do you put it on?
just with a paper towel, or pour it on, and just as long as it gets oiled. Yeah, I mean, I guess grease would work too. Anything to curb the water rusting, but typically oil.
And if you're looking to be more environmentally friendly, no oil would work in the same.
Yeah, your cooking oil, and yeah, for sure. Yeah. So for sure, if you don't do that after every use, at least promise me that you'll do it in the fall. Once you're done all your fall work, clean your tools up, oil them, hang them up, and you're ready for spring.
The same as I said before, cleaning things like the concrete, things you don't want to clean the garden hose where it's wet, because that helps promote the rust. It gets in along the handle areas, and it can shorten the lifespan of your tools.
Yeah. If you have a grinder at home, like this one, you can easy, when you got the stone, you can easy just run it through here and sharpen you just need to have a nice little edge in there. It just makes your work easier, that's all. It doesn't change anything else other than makes your job easier. So, okay. Landscaping. This is a huge category. It's one that I think all of us are interested in. We all kind of want to dabble in landscaping a little bit. So I'm just going to touch briefly on some general concepts, but landscaping is up to your own creative ability. That's really where it stems from. And there's lots of resources out there. There's lots of picture books and different things. So now, how many are within the BNRC? Okay, and you're outside. How'd you get here? How'd you get in? They let you in, eh? But you have a country property? Yeah. So again, it's a lot different because you got kind of no end of things to, yeah. So we're going to kind of talk about the smaller lots. And the first thing I think that it's important is to have a plan, to start with a plan. And what you all should have, and if you don't have it, you can get it, is the survey of your property. So when you purchased your property, you should have received a copy of the survey from your lawyer. If you don't have that, you can probably pick up one from Land Titles. So you might have to pay $25 for it, but at least it gives you the dimensions of your lot and how your house lays within that. Or you can go out and do the measurements yourself. But if you got $25 burning a hole in your pocket, then you can get it all done for you. And or you could go on Google Maps now and you can see what your place looks like from on top, if there's not too many trees covering it. So there's a few resources to get that. But and draw it out if you want to do drawing, or if you're computer savvy and you got a program. At least get it sketched out either digitally or on paper, and then you've got something to start to work with. Then you can start penciling in some lines and doing some different things. And draw it to scale so that and you've got an idea then what a mature tree is going to look like in a particular spot. And always think of your plants in their mature state, because we've all seen where somebody's gone in and they plucked a tree here and it was only, you know, maybe this big and 6 feet tall. That'll look great there. Grows up and all of a sudden it's right in front of your window. You know, it didn't start out that way, but when it got big, that's where it ended up. So you've got to think about all your plants in their mature state. The other big factor, which will be no end of headache for you and possibly your neighbors, is if you don't give proper consideration to water and where it goes. You don't want it in your basement. You don't want it on your neighbor's property. So you've got to make your drainage, your swales, so that it runs away from the house. And please don't have it run to your neighbor, because they won't like you anymore on the next heavy rainfall. So get it to the street or to the back lane, and then your problems are mostly solved. And then think about what function you want to have happen in your yard. If you've got little kids, then you want to leave spaces for them to play. Most of us don't want our kids playing on the street. It's not always a healthy or safe place to play. So you want to create a space in the backyard where you can keep them enclosed. So do you want a sand pile back there? Do you want a little paddling pool? Do you want a family space for a patio? Do you want to put up a badminton net? Do you want to put up a fire pit? You know, so leave space in your backyard for those functions that you may want to add later. The other thing to think about is the aesthetics. So at some time in the course of your life, you're going to want to sell this property. So then you have to do things that are going to create what we call curb appeal. So you want it to look nice. And so what you do today is going to impact on what that thing looks like in 10 years. So you got to think about the aesthetics. I heard a statistic, now this was years ago in Calgary, but at that time when the big boom was going on in Calgary, they were saying that the landscaping was 30% of the value of the property. So, you know, if you got $1 million house, conceivably they were spending $300,000 on landscaping. And that is not, believe me, some of these big properties are not difficult to do. You start laying down paving stone and retaining walls and water features and things. But if you've got a $200,000 house, then you can think about spending, you know, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 is not out of the question. Maybe not in the Brandon market, but certainly landscape has a big drawing factor when it comes to real estate value. The other one that always gets me is ease of maintenance. So we're going to look at a plan here in a minute, but you want to make a design so that it's easy to look after. Particularly when it comes to lawn mowing, when it comes to weeding, things like that. You really want to you want it to look nice, but you also want it to be easy so that this thing is not going to be a chore every time you got to go out and do some handwork. So you want to make it easy. Yeah, those are the main factors. So plan and design. Be sure your water is going the right direction. Think about function. What do you want to do in the yard? What are the aesthetics going to be? What you want it to look like, and that curb appeal, and then ease of maintenance. So I just kind of drew. I don't know how many lots look like this, but most lots that might be in the BNRC could be 50 by 120. I'm guessing That's kind of the average size lot in the downtown area of Brandon. Okay, so I didn't draw it to scale like I said you should, but anyway, I freehanded this. So let's say this is the street here, and you got 50 feet and you got 120. So the house is going to be somewhere in the middle, side to side, and a lot closer to the front than it is at the back, right? So what my idea is generally, and you see this in a lot of landscape designs, you take some point on the building, and then you start to build on that. So what you want to do is to gradually go from you've got nothing happening out here. This is sidewalk. Then you got a little bit of grass, and then you want to ease your way into the building. So you kind of want to soften those edges. So I always kind of like to take. I like working with curves. So you kind of start doing this sort of thing. Okay. Sorry, my line's not too straight there, but so this would all be either colorful, like your shrubbery, your ornamental shrubbery. So what this does, it gets away from having to do anything over in this corner, because this is your neighbor over here. And you also want to kind of close off this area on the other side. You got your sidewalk going down this side, and you want to kind of close off this from any public access to your backyard. You've probably got a fence here. But anyway, you can kind of smooth that off by making some kind of a line there like that. So more curvy than that. That's why you got the edger, because you're gonna make a nice smooth line around there. And I'm not a big fan of a lot of flowers in the front yard. I think because you don't want to spend a lot of time deadheading or leaning in your front yard with this to the street. So I just put shrubs in the front yard and leave the flowers to the back, okay? That's just my thoughts, all right? But having shrubbery up against the house like this kind of softens the structure of the house. And then this can be grass, okay? Then you've got this little space in here. You could put flowers in there just to kind of have a little pop of color. It's a very small space, and you see it also going all the way down. If this happens to be the south side, you see a lot of people putting tomatoes in here, or those things that are going to come early, like the heat. And that's actually not a bad spot for those kind of crops, because it's easy to get at from your sidewalk, and it's making use of otherwise not very usable space. You're sure not going to want to mow there. And then you've got all this area in here. Now I've seen some people that would actually plant all this too. That could be a garden if if there's not shade from this person, but you could use that as a garden space too. So if you're really loving gardening, then I think that would look great, taking that side of your property and making a little garden. When you're back in here, so here's the steps into the back porch. I mean, then you can do something like that for a patio. You got your barbecue. You've got to get from here to here to the garage anyway, because most houses don't have an attached garage in that part of town. So you can connect the two with the patio, and then you've got this area here. Here's your big space for the kids to play in. And then, if you want to plant trees, then do them on the edges as opposed to in the middle. Also, if you want to do a big vegetable garden, that could be over there. It could be in here, but on this side, think about where the shade's going to hit from your garage. So, not that this is your design, but just things to think about when you're placing stuff.
Orientation of where your home is situated to the axis north, south, east, and west will determine. So if you're going to bring a drawing like this to Bernie and ask him for help, mark the north, south, east, and west. That way he knows what to recommend to put in those areas.
Yeah, for sure. And if this is your winter project, then get your diagram and then go around with your iPhone camera and take pictures of what view you have out of this front window, or what view you had out of the back window, or if you've got a bathroom window that looks somewhere when you want, and you're like looking out that bathroom window, then do those things, and then also take pictures of what it looks like here, so that you know what part of the neighbor's property is shading your property. If you plant this tree there, what's it going to shade? Is their garden there? And if you like those neighbors and you don't want to put a great big tree, if you're in the south side, you don't want to put a big tree there, so it shades their garden. So you got to think about the neighbors and living peaceably in your neighborhood. So take lots of pictures before you're doing your plans, so that in the winter time you can say, oh yeah, if I do that there, then this is going to be the consequence of that. So it's relatively simple. When I first little landscaping course I took, which was not unlike what you folks do, we had to all do this, and we drew it a hard copy on a piece of paper, so in either ink or pencil, and then we had, who knows what onion skin is. I dated myself, but then you'd have onion skin that you'd lay over this thing, and that's when you'd start to do all your designing, and you could do as many onion skins as you wanted to, with different ideas. And it was just kind of fun to do. But now you can do that all on a computer for $100. You can have that program, and that's what most landscapers use now. So anyway, so there's no substitute for doing the plan. Any questions about landscaping? That was kind of all I was going to say about.
What you said about your water and that, usually you try and get a 2% grade away from your home, which is a fairly gentle slope, and ideally you'd like to keep a swale. If your neighbor is here, when Bernie said a swale, remember I said it's a gentle slope each way, that would be up the center of the two properties. So the moisture from yours would come here, your neighbors would go here, and disperse front or backwards.
Yeah. And then you also want to be sure that your eaves troughs are going to that swale. My niece lives over on Princess and 22nd over there somewhere. Anyway, they got a beautiful big 2-story home, and lots of roof and big eaves troughs coming down, and they rerouted these things down. Well, where did the water go? But onto the neighbor's property. So that wasn't a nice situation. So they've rerouted it, and they've got this eave trough coming down here over to the fence, and then running all the way down the fence out here. I mean, you can make use of your eaves troughs, the troughing to go all the way down a fence. It's not beautiful, but if it eases the problem, you got to do what you got to do. So.
It's better than the alternative of
Yes.
having to redo a basement.
Yes. Or end up in court somewhere or something. Okay, so just focusing on gardens. So generally, there's kind of the two gardens. There's the vegetable garden, and there's the flower garden. Some people do incorporate flowers into their vegetable garden. Not many people put vegetables in their flower garden, if you know what I mean. But just some things to think about particularly with your vegetable garden, is location. Again, you want to have generally full sun, because there's not many vegetables that like shade. So pretty well all of them are full sun crop. And not that you have much choice, but in a backyard of that size, you kind of gotta pick a corner and go with it, and whatever the soil is there is what you got, right? But once you start digging, you might find out what kind of soil you have. So, and you can make any soil, most soils work for you, but you may have to amend. So if you've got a heavy clay soil, then you could add in a little bit of sand to get some porosity. In that case, you don't want to add peat moss, because peat moss retains moisture. So in clay soils, you don't need to retain moisture. You want to create porosity and drainage. So then you want to work in organic matter. You can put in sand. There was a product called zeolite, and zeolite was something that we don't sell it so much anymore, but you could add that in, and that tends to break up the large clay particles. So there's that's what you can do with it. Or if it's really sandy, which is what happens on the east end of Brandon, then you do want to add, again, organic matter. You want to create something that retains the moisture. Peat moss has, in our world, has kind of fallen out of favor because peat moss tends to create a little environment for the plant roots, and they say, oh, I'm happy here. I'm just going to stay right here where the peat moss is, and the roots don't go out any further. So we recommend more manure, something that breaks down, because peat moss does not disintegrate very quickly.